A story called Needy Catgirl Overload sounds like it should be one of the least serious episodes Girls Frontline 2 has done so far, and for a while, that is exactly what it feels like. It's chaotic, it's comedic, it's full of misunderstandings, jealousy, over-the-top affection, and Basti being probably one of the most openly obsessed dolls we had in the story so far. So at first, I thought I knew what kind of episode this was going to be. A fun character story, a lighter break after the more serious parts of the main narrative. Nothing wrong with that. But then the episode took a turn I genuinely did not expect. Underneath all of that comedy, all the catgirl energy, and all the ridiculous misunderstandings, there is a much darker emotional core to Basti than the title first suggests. And that is where this episode becomes a lot more interesting to me. Not because every choice works perfectly, actually there is one storytelling device here I usually hate, and somehow even that ended up working better than I expected. So the question I kept coming back to after finishing this episode was pretty simple. How did a story that looks this ridiculous on the surface end up becoming one of the better examples of what Girls Frontline 2 does so well? And I think the answer starts with Basti herself. At first, Basti feels like exactly the kind of character the episode title promises. A needy cat girl. Very subtle, absolutely no warning signs there. She is loud, affectionate, dramatic, jealous, and so attached to the commander that every interaction with her feels like it is one sentence away from becoming a problem. That's part of what makes her fun, because every doll in Girls Frontline 2 has some kind of bond with a commander. That is basically part of the premise at this point. But Basti does not hide it. She sees the commander and every emotion she has comes flying out at full speed. So at first I thought I understood what the story was doing. Basti was going to be the fun one. The chaotic character who enters the cast, causes trouble, gets jealous over everyone and turns the episode into a comedy of misunderstandings. And to be fair, she is that. Her jealousy towards the other dolls is funny, her reactions are over the top, her attachment to the commander has this almost light yandere energy, where it's intense enough to be ridiculous, but still exaggerated enough to keep the episode comedic. But the more I watched, the more I started noticing something else. The comedy only works because Basti is not faking any of it. Her attachment to the commander is funny because it's so extreme, but it's also a little uncomfortable because the emotion behind it feels real. She's not acting needy just because the episode needs a cute gimmick. She is desperate to be seen. She wants the commander's approval so badly that even a small misunderstanding feels much bigger to her than it probably should. And once that clicked, the title started feeling a little deceptive. Needy Catgirl Overload sounds like a joke, but Basti herself is not only a joke. The same intensity that makes her funny is also what makes her fragile. That's the part I did not expect. The story lets her be ridiculous, but it also keeps hinting that there is something much less funny underneath all of that. That's why the episode Darker Turn doesn't feel completely random. The warning signs were already there, they were just hidden behind the catgirl chaos. And that brings me to the part of the episode I was a lot more worried about. If there's one kind of storytelling device I usually cannot stand, it's misunderstandings. And somehow, this episode decided to build almost its entire first half around them. This is where the episode starts walking into a dangerous territory for me, because I usually hate misunderstanding driven stories. Most of the time, they feel artificial. Characters stop communicating for no real reason, the story stretches a problem that could be solved in 10 seconds, and everyone suddenly becomes less intelligent because the plot needs the misunderstanding to continue. So when I realized this episode was building so much of its comedy around misunderstandings, I got a little worried. But this is also where the episode surprised me. Because the misunderstandings here are not just one simple problem being dragged out for hours. It's more like a chain reaction. Different characters want different things, everyone is moving towards their own goal, and somehow those goals keep crashing into each other. That's what makes the comedy work better than I expected. The episode is silly, but the misunderstandings are not completely random. They come from who these characters are, what they want, and how they react to each other. And that matters a lot. If a misunderstanding only exists because the writers needs chaos, it gets annoying very quickly. But if it grows out of personality, then it can actually reveal something about the cast. That's what happens here. For most of the first half, the episode is playing with chaos. Everyone is misreading someone, everyone is reacting to incomplete information, everyone is making the situation worse in their own very specific way. When the commander finally enters the picture more directly, that same structure turns into something much heavier. Because Basti's misunderstanding is not just another joke, It shows the most vulnerable part of her character. She thinks she disappointed the commander, and because her entire emotional world is built around wanting their approval, that misunderstanding does not stay comedic. It breaks her. That's the turn that made the episode more interesting to me. The story starts with silly chaos, but then it shows how the same kind of misunderstanding can become dangerous when it hits the wrong person in the wrong place emotionally. And somehow that darker moment does not feel completely separate from the rest of the episode. It's still built from the same foundation. Basti's intensity, the character dynamics, the fact that everyone keeps acting on what they think is happening instead of what is actually happening. That's why I think the episode gets away with a trope I usually hate. Not because misunderstandings suddenly became my favorite thing, they absolutely did not, but because here they are tied to character, they create comedy, but they also expose vulnerability. And once the heavier misunderstanding is resolved, the episode can return to comedy without feeling like it completely forgot what happened. That balance is not easy. A story like this can easily feel like a tonal whiplash. But Girls Frontline 2 mostly makes it work because the silly side and the serious side are coming from the same place. And that brings me to one of the biggest reasons this episode works as well as it does, the way Girls Frontline 2 handles perspective. There was one point where this episode could have completely fallen apart. Actually, more than one. The misunderstandings could have become annoying. Basti's breakdown could have felt too sudden. The comedy after the darker moment could have felt completely out of place. And if any of those pieces failed, the whole episode probably would have felt messy in the worst way. So why didn't it? That is the part I kept coming back to after finishing the episode. Because the answer isn't only Basti. She is the emotional center of the episode, obviously, but she is not the only reason the story holds together. The real thing holding it together is perspective. This game has always been pretty good at multiple POV storytelling, but here it felt even more important than usual. This episode has a lot of moving pieces. Different characters want different things, some are acting on incomplete information, others are misreading the situation entirely. If we only followed one side of the story, the whole thing could have felt like random chaos. But because the episode keeps moving between different points of view, the chaos starts making sense. We understand why each character makes the wrong assumption. We understand how those assumptions crash into each other. And most importantly, we understand why Basti reacts the way she does when the situation finally reaches her. Think about how different this would feel if we only saw Basti from the outside. Her reaction might feel too extreme, maybe even melodramatic. But because the episode already shows us how emotionally dependent she is on the commander's approval, the breakdown makes sense. It's still dramatic, maybe even a little too dramatic, depending on how much you like this kind of character, but it's not empty drama. It comes from the same place as her comedy. Her affection is funny because it's intense. Her breakdown hurts because that intensity is real. That's what Girls Frontline 2 handles surprisingly well here. The episode doesn't treat comedy and vulnerability as completely separate things. It lets one turn into the other. And for a story called Needy Catgirl Overload, that is a lot more than I expected. That keeps the idea, but it feels more like the viewer is testing the episode with you. This also shows something I've been liking more and more about Girls Frontline 2. Its character episodes do not feel completely disconnected from the main story. Yes, this is Basti's episode, obviously, but it does not feel like the game pauses the current narrative just to introduce her. It follows from where the story currently is. It uses the current situation, and even though the tone is much lighter for most of the episode, the consequences still feel tied to the larger narrative. That's probably why this episode left a stronger impression on me than I expected. Not because I suddenly love misunderstanding-driven plots, I still don't, but because it takes something that could have been disposable and gives it just enough character weight, perspective, and narrative connection to matter. That's the biggest compliment I can give this episode. It looks like a silly catgirl story, and to be fair, it is. But somewhere inside all that chaos, Girls Frontline 2 still finds a real emotional core. So what do you guys think? Did Basti's episode work for you? Or did the misunderstanding-heavy structure bother you more than it bothered me? And what do you think about Basti herself? Is she a fun addition to the cast? Or was she a little too much? Anyway, that's gonna be all from me for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.